Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today is the start of a reading vlog where I read all of Mara from Books Like Woe's favorite books. Okay, so here's the thing. Mara and I are pretty good friends. We've been friends for a few years now, and I feel like we know each other pretty well and have a lot of similar taste in books. It's not always exactly the same, but we have a lot of overlap. And I've seen people do this before where they'll read Booktuber's favorite books of the year, but I was thinking it would be interesting to try reading Mara's all-time favorite books because I feel like I might have a pretty good hit rate in terms of also loving the books that she loves. And here's why. When I had this idea, I was thinking, okay, I remember seeing her do a video where she talked about her favorite books as of 2020. And I know that Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice were both on the list. I love both of those books. In fact, Jane Eyre is one of my top 10 all-time favorite books as well. And so I decided to go and look at her list. And what's interesting about it is that of those 10 books, I have already read 5 of them, and of the 5 that I've read, 1 of them is an all-time favorite, and 3 of them I gave 5 stars to, which I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good hit rate. I feel like the odds of me finding new books I love just by reading the rest of her favorites list is pretty high. And I thought this might be interesting for you guys to see as well. I actually read a lot of books on the recommendation of Mara. Like there's a lot of books that I pick up because I see her talking about it because we do have such similar taste in a lot of things. But this is a more formalized version. So we're gonna start off by looking at the list that she says are her top 10 all-time favorites. And if you haven't seen the video where she talks about them, I will link it up above for you guys. You can go check that video out as well. But we're gonna look at all of those books, talk about which ones I've already read, which ones I haven't, and then the ones that I haven't, I will acquire if I don't already have them and read them and let you guys know how it goes. And what I'm hoping for from this video is that I find a few new favorite books for myself. That's what I'm hoping to get out of this because we do tend to have such similar taste. Okay, so let's look at her list. I already mentioned Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. In fact, I think she said this is her favorite book of all time, period. I really love Jane Eyre as well. I read it for the first time when I was a teenager. I've reread it over the years, and it's a book that I really love, one of my favorite classics. Also on her list is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, another one that I love. I gave 5 stars to this one. It didn't quite make it on my top 10 all-time favorites, but it's definitely up there. Like it's pretty high up there on my personal favorites list. Also on her top 10 list was Hunger, A Memoir of My Body by Roxane Gay. This is another one that I have read. I really loved it. I gave it 5 stars, and it's one that I've kept on my shelves. I thought this was a really amazing book, really powerful, really moving, and I think the year that I read this was one of my favorite nonfiction books. Then we have All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Who's surprised? The Queen of Murderbot loves this book. I also really love the series, really love this book, and gave it 5 stars. I'm a big fan of Murderbot myself. You know, give me all the snarky sci-fi novellas. I just love it a whole lot. It's wonderful. And then the last of her top 10 that I've read, and the only one that I didn't give as high of a rating to is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I gave this one 3 stars, although my enjoyment level of it was actually more like a 4, 4.5. I think I was a little bit uncomfortable with some of the racial elements of this, among other things. But in terms of the actual writing style, the mystery plot, I did really like it. And if I were to do it again, maybe I would bump my rating to like 3.5. I think I have some mixed feelings about some of the elements of what she was doing in that book. If you think about like the original title of the book, it's a whole thing, but I get why she loves it. I know she's a huge fan of Agatha Christie, and so, you know, this wasn't a book that I hated. So that's half of her list. That's a pretty good hit rate, to be honest, which is why I'm very hopeful for the rest of the list. So the question is, what else is on her list? What are the books that I need to acquire? Of the other 5 books, I only currently own one of them. That is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I had a mass market paperback of this and just recently acquired a hardcover from Book of the Month Club, and I've been wanting to read this. This one is actually also not that long, so it shouldn't take that long to read. This one is a portrait of an English butler in post-war England. Sounds really interesting. Sounds like something I would enjoy. I have been wanting to read from Kazuo Ishiguro anyway, and I know Mara really, really loves this. Obviously, it's in her top 10 favorite books, so I already own this. Then there are 4 others that I need to purchase. First up is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is a collection of kind of darkly feminist fairy tale retellings, I want to say. And I know Mara has suggested this to me in the past. She said it was something that she thought about getting me when we did the TBR swap video, and she ended up going with something else. I've been wanting to read from Angela Carter this year, and it does totally sound like my jam, like the kind of thing I would enjoy. So excited to pick this one up. Next is The Obsession by Nora Roberts. This, I think, is more of a mystery thriller type book from Nora Roberts, and I know Mara loves her as an author and has read a ton of her books and is working on reading all of her books. I don't think I've ever read Nora Roberts. Maybe when I was really young, like I think my grandpa sometimes had some of her books around and I might have picked up 1 or 2 randomly, but at least as an adult or that I can remember, I have not read any of her books, and she's another one that I've wanted to try out, so this seems like a great opportunity. Next is another nonfiction title. This is All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. This is kind of a classic of narrative nonfiction and probably not something that I would have picked up on my own, but I am curious because I do know Mara loves it so much. So for this one, I might actually see if I can get my hands on an audio copy until I read it and decide if I actually want a physical copy. I tend to like consuming my nonfiction via audio, so that's probably the route I'm going to take for that one. And then lastly, we have Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie. Maybe unsurprisingly, Agatha Christie is one of her favorite authors, so we've got 2 books by her. One of them I've read. I've never read Cards on the Table, but I have really enjoyed what I've read from Agatha Christie and have been wanting to read more from her, so this seems like a great opportunity. So I am going to go and get my hands on the 4 books that I don't currently have, and I will be back with you guys with an update. Hey guys, it is February 24th. I'm here with just a real quick update. 2 of the books arrived. I have a mass market paperback copy of The Obsession by Nora Roberts, and I have a copy of Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie. It's probably going to take a while for The Bloody Chamber to arrive because I ended up ordering a copy from Book Depository because there was a cover that I liked better, and I'm petty about covers. It's fine. And then I think for the nonfiction one, I'm just going to go ahead and get that on audio and not try to buy a physical copy, which I might have said earlier. Yet, unless I read it and love it and need a physical copy. We'll see. That is it. Once I start one of the books, I will be back with another update. Hello everybody, it is March 1st and I just wanted to do a quick update to let you know that I have started reading Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie. I actually have access to the audiobook through Scribd, so I'm like reading along physically and doing some listening to audio. This is one where I kind of want to see the words on the page, not just listen, but so I'm doing like a blended read. So far, I'm interested. It's going very quickly. It's a murder that takes place at a dinner party, and yeah, so far it's interesting. It's fun. One thing I will say about this is it's clear Agatha Christie had some feelings about feminists. Because there's an investigative character who's a feminist and like she's very aggressive and like over the top and I don't think supposed to be likable. I'm like, okay, I guess you did not like feminists back in the day. But yeah, anyway, so far I'm enjoying it. I will let you guys know what I think when I'm done. Hello everybody. So I have been reading this book. I'm about halfway through and I want to talk about it. I am really curious to see who the murderer is going to be because if I'm right about what I think, this book is doing some very interesting things. So I'm sorry if this ends up being spoilery. I will let you know for sure once I'm there. One of the suspects for the murder is a young woman named Anne Meredith, and I am pretty sure she's supposed to be a lesbian, and if she ends up being the murderer, that is going to be something. So the thing is that she lives with another young woman who's described as boyish, who's described as having a boyish figure. She behaves towards Anne the way that a more protective husband or something would behave. And then when Superintendent Battle goes into town to like find out information about them, the people talk about how the young ladies live together, and Miss Dawes, not Annie, the boyish one, is the money maker in the family. And it says, it's Miss Dawes who's got the money, of course. Miss Anne's her companion, in a manner of speaking. Back in this time period, probably means that they were two women in a romantic relationship. It's really interesting. I have not read any reviews of the book, so I don't know if this is something other people have talked about or picked up on, but I swear I'm gonna pitch a fit if Anne turns out to be the murderer, because of course, like, we can't have a queer woman be like fine. Anyway, it's a whole thing. It's very interesting. We'll see what happens. But like, I started reading it and I was like, wait a minute. And then like there's little details that keep adding to it. And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like the subtext here. Anyway, very interesting. When was this one published? Okay. Yeah, so this was published in 1937. It is a ride, you guys. It's very interesting. Otherwise, I'm enjoying the mystery. Poirot is really interesting. But it's like this, and I have heard people talk about the fact that some of Agatha Christie's racism and anti-Semitism comes through in other books, and I've seen it in other books I've read of hers. But now we're also getting like anti-feminism and fat phobia and maybe some like homophobia, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. I depending on like how they end up making it happen. Anyway, it's very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading though. I am enjoying it. I like her writing and I like the stories. It's just so littered with things that would be super problematic today. So, you know, one thing that's really interesting, because I'm listening to the audiobook and reading along physically, they're taking the racist and anti-Semitic things out of the audiobooks, which is interesting. I wonder why they don't edit them out of the physical texts as well, or like how those decisions are made. But there have been several things where I'm like, oh, they're just not saying that on the audiobook, which is interesting. Okay, so case in point here, it says, I'd lay long odds against its being Despard who did the dirty work the other evening. He's a white man, Battle. In the audiobook, it says, he's a good man, Battle. There's a lot of this stuff in here, guys. Back with another update. So I finished reading Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie and have some thoughts. So I have to say, Poirot is incredibly charming. I really like him as a character, and I think that is part of what makes me want to read more Agatha Christie's. I think he's very interesting, very charming, and I like his style. I like how he interacts with people. This was a really interesting book that I think is looking at the psychology of a murderer, how people would murder in different ways, why they would do it, methods they would use, because you have more than one person who has murdered in the past, but only one of them committed this particular murder. So it's interesting. Yeah, I do wonder, I know I said what I said earlier about Annie, and later in the book does become more complex. It's possible that she was just good friends with this girl, but I just wonder, it feels like possibly there is that queer subtext, even though there is discussion between the two of them later about men but I mean, bisexual people exist. So anyway, it was interesting. There's quite a bit of like racist and anti-Semitic little things thrown in here, which again, it's interesting to me that those are not taken out of the physical books, but they are removed from the audiobooks. How do I feel about this? I will say I did really enjoy the mystery. I enjoyed Poirot and the process of figuring out who did it. It's interesting and charming. There are also a couple of meta elements to this book that are kind of fun, and it makes me wonder, because I know that's a thing that Mara appreciates in books, if that's one of the things that she particularly likes about this. One is there's a reference to Sherlock Holmes, which is fun because who of course is yet another literary detective, and also the feminist that I was talking about. It's interesting because she's also the author of murder mystery novels, and she kind of talks down about her books and her readers, which is interesting. And there's a scene where Rhoda goes to see her to tell her about Annie's past, but Rhoda is also a fan of her books. And so they have this really interesting interaction where Rhoda's like, oh, it must be amazing to just like put all this down in books. And the author's kind of like, well, yeah, it's a lot of work. It doesn't seem like work to me. Well, that's because you're not doing it. It's a lot of work for me. It's really not that interesting. And my detective is very silly, but readers seem to like him, and it pays the bills. And so it's like, clearly kind of jading the perspective of this like hopeful young fan. And it's funny because Agatha Christie herself is also an author of mystery novels with a detective, and it makes me wonder if that element of it is somewhat of a self-insert meta element of her commenting on her feelings about her books or her feelings about her writing. I don't know, but I think it's interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think every time I read Agatha Christie, I enjoy her books. But for sure, you do have to go in knowing that you are going to encounter things that are, don't hold up today. And for me, those things make it hard for me to consider her books as favorites. I mean, I talked about at the beginning of the video how And Then There Were None, that was part of my issue with it, even though I actually enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the mystery. Those elements just drag down the experience of it for me a little bit. So Cards on the Table, I am going to give 4 stars. I did really enjoy it quite a lot. I think if it hadn't had all of those things and the possible homophobia, I don't know. I'm not sure how to read that, so I don't want to put words in her mouth, but there are definitely things in the text that make me wonder if that's what she's getting at. I don't know. I'm gonna have to message Mara and have a conversation with her about it and see what she thinks, because I think that could be interesting. But yeah, 4 stars for this one. I did enjoy it. I'm not mad I read it, and I can see why it could be a favorite for an Agatha Christie lover like Mara. Next up, I did start listening to All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, and so far it's really interesting. I knew quite a bit about the Watergate case and Nixon's presidency, but there are still quite a few things in here that I did not know. I think I saw the film version many years ago, but I don't remember very much about it. Also, I know at one point we went to the Nixon Presidential Museum, which was really interesting, and learned some about his life and later life and some about the Watergate scandal. I'm only 10% of the way into the audiobook, but it's really interesting, and it is wild how twisty things went and how far they took it to try to cover up all of the stuff. It's mind-boggling. So enjoying that so far. It's going well. I will update you guys more a little later when I've made some progress. Bye. Hey guys, so I am about halfway through All the President's Men, and it's been really interesting. I'll talk more about it later, but especially in light of our most recent presidency, it's been really interesting, if a little slow at times. So yeah, making progress. Hey guys, I am home having some tea. Babysitter just arrived, so I'm gonna get some work done, but I thought I would do a quick update with how things are going on All the President's Men. But first, a package arrived from Book Depository, and I'm pretty sure this is the Bloody Chamber. Yay! Which would mean I have all the books that I would need. So let's go ahead and open this. I like that their packages are relatively easy to open. Yes! Ooh, it's hardcover. Oh, look how pretty. Yes, I'm excited. Okay, so here it is. I love this cover so much. This is why I wanted to order the one from the UK. Look at those end papers. It's beautiful. Yeah, awesome. And it's not terribly long. Short story collection. Really, really excited. So yes, I officially have all the books for the vlog. Yay. Okay, so All the President's Men, I am halfway through it, maybe just I'm about halfway through it right now, and it's been really interesting. Parts of it are quite slow. There are parts of it where I'm like, okay, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of things happening. Some of it is less interesting than other things, but a lot of it is pretty wild, pretty fascinating, and just seeing the lengths that they went for this cover-up is wild. I will say reading it in 2021 is quite interesting as well, because there are for sure some parallels you can draw, I think, between what happened during this period of the Nixon presidency and some things to do with our most recent Trump presidency. And so that's interesting to see. Of course, this occurred pre-digital era, and things were quite different then than they are now, but you can for sure see some parallels. So yeah, I'm liking it. I don't foresee this one being a new favorite for me either, but I'm glad that I'm finally reading it because it is for sure a classic of nonfiction and of journalism. Going well. I have probably higher hopes for some of the other books that I'm going to be reading, so I have a feeling The Bloody Chamber and The Remains of the Day are much more likely to be ones that I'll love. I don't know what to expect from The Obsession, so we'll see. That is my update. I will be back to check in a little bit later. Bye. All right, so I finished listening to All the President's Men, and I liked it. I think it's really interesting. It does end a little abruptly. I would have preferred more at the end. I think the newer edition of the physical book might have an epilogue, but unfortunately the audiobook version did not include the later added epilogue to that edition. But yeah, I think it was really interesting, well worth reading. I think it's an important piece of history and piece of journalism. I do think early in the book it can be a little bit slow and there are a lot of people to follow and they don't make it simple. It does seem like one of those things where maybe if you had been alive during that time, you would be more familiar with all of the different names they're throwing around and it might be easier to follow. But for me, I'm kind of like, I know who Richard Nixon is and that's about it. So yeah, like it makes it a little complicated, especially listening to it on audio, but I was able to pretty much follow it fine. For me, this is probably going to fall somewhere in like the 4 to 4.5 star range. I'll write a review and give it a little thought before I decide on a final rating. Not a new favorite for me, partly because I think this is just not my favorite version of nonfiction, but it is a classic, definitely one that I think is worth reading. And I'm glad that this project pushed me to get to it because I'm not sure that I would have gotten around to reading it otherwise. Good morning. It is March 7th and I started another book. I am reading The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I'm doing this one as a blended read. I do have the audio from my library, but I'm also reading along because the audio is a little... So I'm doing this as kind of a blended read. I do have the audiobook out from my library, but and I like the narrator a lot. He sounds like what this character would sound like, but it is kind of slow, especially for such a short book. So I'm kind of probably going to go back and forth. I have to go run a couple of errands in a little bit, so I'll probably listen to the audiobook while I'm doing that, and then maybe read it physically. It's only about 200 pages, but so far I'm loving it. The writing is beautiful and it's like funny and poignant. So this is from the perspective of a butler of a big house in England, and his world is kind of changing. The estate was sold to an American, and now his staff that at one point was like 28 is down to him and 3 other people. It's really beautiful. I am loving this a whole lot. I have a feeling this could end up being a favorite for me. So yay. I will update you guys a little bit more later once I've read some more. I finished reading The Remains of the Day and I have so many feelings. I like almost cried, which, you know, like I don't cry in a lot of books, so that's a lot. I loved it. I think this is probably going to be one of my favorite books I read this year. Like I need a minute to collect my thoughts and feelings. It's just so beautiful and poignant. I mean, basically it's this butler reflecting back on his life as having been a butler between World War I and into World War II, coming to terms with, you know, like what was the meaning of his life, what had it been, and like, you know, places that maybe he lost out on the possibility of like love. And I just like, I don't know, it was very emotional. I have a lot of feelings about this book. I'd be curious to watch the movie at some point because I could see this being a great movie if it was done well. But yeah, this was just beautiful. It was such a moving book and I think really thought-provoking about like how do we make meaning of our lives and, you know, how much is it our work that brings meaning versus the people in our lives that bring meaning. And I don't know, it's like literary fiction too, so it's hard to like talk really specifically about this. You probably could like do a deep dive into all of the things, but it also, you know, like we get into stuff too about his own father and that being part of what probably turned him into the person that he was. And like, I don't know, there's also like humor, low-key humor in here that I found really funny, and I just love the main character. I have so much like love for this poor soul who just needs some human kindness. I don't know, guys. I loved this a lot. I don't know what else to say about it, but I really loved it a lot. Yeah, which is great. I'm very pleased. So, hey, I did find a new favorite so far. Now I really want to read more from Kazuo Ishiguro because I just love the writing as well. His writing, the prose is so beautiful. I love the way he uses language. I actually ended up not listening to very much of the audiobook. I did a little bit while I was running errands, and then I just turned it off and read it all physically. And it was so nice, especially because this month I've been having to read a lot of stuff that is not necessarily what I want to be reading because I'm like being a judge for a thing and other reasons. And it was just so lovely to lose myself in a book that I was thoroughly enjoying, and I needed this. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, clearly so far this has been the biggest hit of the 3 I've read. I have 2 books left to go. I will touch base whenever I start the next book, but I love this so much. Okay. I'll talk to you guys later. It's super late Saturday night, but I wanted to do a quick update. I did start reading The Obsession by Nora Roberts. I am about 100 pages into it, and I am loving it. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to be as into this as I am. I've not really read Nora Roberts before. I don't know what I was expecting, but this is, I didn't really know anything about the story. It is riveting. It's about this girl who, when she's about 12 years old, discovers that her father has been like holding a woman in this cellar and frees her, and like it turns out that he's a serial killer, and that like changes her entire life, and it's wild. And so like the part where I'm at now, she's now an adult, like 30 or so, and I don't know what's gonna happen next, but I'm loving it. Like it's a great mix of like things that keep you on the edge of your seat and just really like nice domestic scenes. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this so far. So I wanted to give you an update. I have started reading The Bloody Chamber. I took off the cover because it's like pretty and white and I don't want to get it messed up. I've started reading The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. Put this down. So far I've read the first story, the eponymous Bloody Chamber, which is a reimagining of the story of Bluebeard with like a lot of darker elements to it. It follows a young woman who is 17 and is getting married to a much older man who takes her off to his large estate on the ocean, is kind of creepy, likes to make references to poets who were into like BDSM type stuff, and then leaves her for a business trip with keys, including one that he says is to his own private room, and it's the only place she's not supposed to go. I mean, of course she's going to go to the room. And things get very dark. Yeah, no, I really liked it. I think the writing is very poetic. The way it was written was really interesting, creepy and dark, but interesting. And the way it ended puts a bit of a twist on the original. So yeah, it's really interesting. A lot about like violence and the violence that can exist in sex and innocence and the loss of innocence. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm very into it. So that's going well. I do like these kinds of stories. I think this is the longest story by far. It's like 63 pages. The rest of the stories are much shorter. So I will continue reading those. I will also pick up The Obsession and make some more progress in that. I am hoping to finish them both today. we will see how that goes. So I finished reading The Bloody Chamber. I'm getting set up because I'm about to record a podcast episode. This one is going to be about Discworld, talking to Alan from the Library of Alexandria. So I'm going to be pausing on my reading, and after this we'll hopefully get some progress made on the obsession. But like I said, I did finish The Bloody Chamber and I kind of loved it. I have a lot of thoughts about this, so this is going to be one where I'll probably sit down and have a more in-depth conversation with you guys when I'm not like getting ready to record a podcast episode. But yeah, this was very interesting. A different take on fairy tales. Yeah, I'll chat more about it later. Hey guys, it's the next day. I thought I would do a check-in. I had intended to finish The Obsession last night. That did not happen. This is where I'm at, so I'm going to finish it tonight. I was hoping I could finish it before I needed to start on another video. I didn't. It's fine. I am continuing to enjoy this. It is interesting. I looked it up on Goodreads, and apparently this is like a romantic suspense. So I'm curious to see how the romance goes. I think we've now been introduced to the love interest, and she is in the small town now in Seattle fixing up this old house. It's very cozy. I'm really enjoying it, but I'm like waiting for things to get interesting again, I guess, because things are kind of chill right now. So I will let you guys know how that goes. I wanted to talk a little bit more about The Bloody Chamber because I just was like too tired and like out of it to talk much about it. So this is a really interesting collection of short stories. She is retelling different myths and fairy tales in darker, sometimes more feminist ways. They definitely center women and have a lot to do with like the violence that can exist surrounding sexuality, which is really interesting. There's a story in here that I thought was pretty fascinating that is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, except it's flipped, where instead of Beauty turning the Beast into a human, the Beast turns Beauty into a beast. And I just thought that was so fascinating, where her happy ending is escaping from the expectations placed on her as a woman. Yeah, really, really interesting take on a fairy tale. We also get like 3 different versions, basically, of the Red Riding fairy tale, which are also pretty fascinating. I don't want to spoil what happens in them, but yeah, there's just a lot of really interesting stuff. And I think one of the things that Angela Carter does well in this book and complicates for us is this push-pull between the problem of patriarchy and the problem of male violence, with women wanting love and wanting sex from those men, and how that can sometimes get really messy and really complicated. And romantic relationships sometimes are not as simple as we maybe want them to be. Yeah, I really like this collection a lot. It's one of these ones that I think I would have loved to have read in school, where I could discuss it with a classroom. Sadly, in undergrad, when I was actually taking English, where like maybe they would have talked about this, I was going to a religious university, and so there's no way they would have probably included this in the curriculum. But I like it a lot. It's definitely dark and can be violent, but it's very interesting. She also has so many references in her books to other literary works, to other things as well. But like there's 2 Beauty and the Beast retellings, and in one of them there's a reference to Alice in Wonderland, which is interesting. Then there's kind of a vampire story that feels a bit reminiscent of the Miss Havisham character in Charles Dickens. There's just a lot of that kind of thing is very interesting. So yeah, I liked this a lot. I do think, I think this is probably going to be another 5-star read for me. Maybe 6. Maybe 6. I'm gonna sit on it before I decide for sure, but this might end up being, and you know, I probably said this earlier with The Remains of the Day, but a 6 star is what I give to a favorite of the year or a favorite of all time. This might be one of my favorite things I've read this year. It's very striking, which I'm kind of blown away at how successful this video is. I mean, I went in hoping hoping that I would find some new favorite books, possibly by reading Mara's favorites, but the fact that I already have 2 books I've read that are contenders for being favorites of the year, like, That's a damn good success rate, guys. Okay, so I will stop talking about this for now, and I will check back in with you guys once I've either made some more progress on the obsession and have something I really want to talk about, or once I've finished it, and then we will wrap up this project.
But I mean,
I finished this, and now look who I'm watching on live.
For authors to communicate their, I always call that authorial posture when I'm reviewing, of like, okay, this is what the text says. My sense of what the author's posture towards what is happening is this. Like,
hello, so I just got out of that live stream. I finished reading The Obsession finally, so we're here to talk about it and wrap up this vlog. I really liked The Obsession a lot. I do think it's quite long for the kind of book that it is. It's like 460 pages, and it's this interesting blend of cozy, small town, slow burn romance with serial killer mystery. So it's like this really interesting genre blend. But I had a really good time with it. I like the cozy domestic vibes of it. I liked the relationship between our characters. And it's interesting too, because the hero is definitely more of a sort of protective alpha male hero than is usually my taste. But in this case specifically, it didn't really bother me. Maybe because most of the times that he was really pushing that vibe, it was like not intended to dominate our heroine. It was more to try to help get her out of her head, if that makes any sense. I don't know. So this really worked for me. Content warnings for discussions of serial killers and serial rapists and lots of things that go along with that, because there are serial killers in this book. But yeah, this was really good. It was very oddly cozy for a book about serial killers. I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I would probably give this one 5 stars. Yeah, I mean, like, would this also be a favorite thing I've read this year? I don't know, but it's definitely a 5-star read. So I guess basically what I'm saying is, this has been a very successful video. Shockingly successful video. I don't know why I'm so surprised, but I am. I mean, I expected to enjoy all of the books and maybe find a new favorite, but I did not expect things to go as well as they did. The only one that I don't own physically is All the President's Men, which I'm okay with. Like, I'm glad I've read it, but it's probably not something I would return to. All the rest of these, I'm really happy that I own. The Remains of the Day and The Bloody Chamber are both going to be on my list of favorite books that I've read this year. I enjoyed the Agatha Christie, and I guess I should say I did actually have a conversation with Mara about this book, and it was very interesting hearing her take on it. That the one fat feminist detective lady I talked about is a recurring character and is definitely a self-insert for Agatha Christie, which is interesting. Mara's read like all of her stuff, so it was interesting kind of hearing her perspective that like Agatha Christie seems to have a complicated relationship with feminism, where it's like sometimes pro, sometimes against. And while I think there is an argument to be made that perhaps the girls in this book are supposed to be queer, apparently Agatha Christie has a lot of other books where they're much more clearly queer, and it's usually not done very well. Like, it's not treated very positively, so that is definitely a concern. But I did enjoy this. I always enjoy reading from Agatha Christie, even when I have some issues with the things that she puts into her books that are partly a product of her time. And then First Outing with Nora Roberts was really a success. This was not what I was expecting. I mean, based on the cover, I was expecting this to be a much more like creepy, fast-paced thriller type book, and it's really not that. It does have more disturbing moments, but most of this is just a sweet, slow burn, domestic romance about healing from trauma and like opening yourself up to love, and it was really beautiful. I loved it a lot. It was great. And I think this gives me a little bit of a flavor of some of what Nora Roberts can do, and I find this really cozy to read and very comforting, so I can see why this would be appealing. So all in all, this was quite a success. I don't think I gave anything less than 4 stars. Is that right? I didn't give anything less than 4 stars. My lowest rated book was Cards on the Table, and I still really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. I gave 4.5 stars to All the President's Men. The Obsession was 5 stars, and the other 2 books were both 6 stars, which is what I give to favorites of the year. Yay. Yeah, so I'm very happy that I did this. I think the other thing that this makes me feel better about is the frequency with which I buy or otherwise acquire books based on hearing Mara talk about them. Like, I feel much more justified in that, basically, because if this is telling me anything about my hit rate with books that she loves, we're doing pretty well. So I will put up the final tally here. I think we can comfortably say there's a lot of crossover between things that she loves and things that I love, at least from this direction. I do think it would be interesting looking at the list of my top 10 favorite books, because I'm not sure we would have the same level of crossover. I think I have certain things that I really love that Mara wouldn't like as much, but that would be like an interesting thing to see. So that's the video. Hopefully this was fun. I'm glad I did the project. It was fun. It was interesting. And I found some new books that were really great. Yay. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for question of the day, tell me if you have a friend who you feel like you could really trust their recommendations on books. Like, you know that if they love a book, your odds of loving it are pretty high. Like, let me know if you have somebody like that in the comments down below. I think that would be interesting. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. If you want to support the work of the channel, feel free to check out the Patreon link down below or check out channel memberships. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.